Welcome to the final program by Inconvenient Questions, or IQ, for General Election 2020. You may call it our Eve of Cooling Off Day special. It's a 1-hour wrap-up program called GE Final Thoughts. I'm Vishwas Sadashivan, your moderator. To help with the analysis today, we have a panel of 5 distinguished persons. Woon Tai Ho, media consultant and CEO, Rights Asia, a media veteran with over 25 years of experience. He was behind the launch and regional expansion of Channel News Asia and formerly the managing director of MediaCorp News. Welcome, Tai Ho.
Thank you.
Second, we have Nicholas Fang, former nominated member of parliament or NMP and currently managing director of Black Dot, a strategic communications consultancy. And hi, Nick.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Next, we have Associate Professor Bilveer Singh, a name that's well known when it comes to Singapore politics. He's been commenting on Singapore politics since I was an embryo.
Oh my God.
Okay. He currently teaches at the Department of Political Science at the National University of Singapore. How many years have you been teaching there, Bilveer?
41.
41 years. See, I told you. I mean, you were teaching from the time I was an embryo. Okay. Donald Low, Professor Donald Low, Professor of Practice in Public Policy and Director of Institute of Emerging Market Studies at the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology. His research focuses on inequality and social policy, as well as politics and the governance of Singapore. Hi, Donald.
Hi, welcome.
And last, but certainly not least, Kwan Jin Yao. Jin Yao is a PhD candidate at the University of California, Los Angeles, and he runs a site called socialservice.com, socialservice.sg. It's focused on presenting and explaining social service research in Singapore. Hi, Jin Yao.
Hi, thank you for having me. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. Now, okay, let's get on with it. My first question, gentlemen. This is dubbed a crisis election. It's also dubbed an unusual election. In many ways, it is. And so my question to you is, how do you think it has panned out so far? In terms of fairness, in terms of transparency, in terms of who do you think were the stars? Who were the disappointments? Which strategies worked? What worked in general and what didn't? Okay, who'd like to go first? Bilveer.
Okay, let me shoot. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you.
I actually thought this election is more about the administration of an election rather than the politics of the election. This is my 8th general elections in Singapore. I've been watching it. I find more continuity than change. Most of the things are the same just after the election boundary committee reports, and then everything happened the same except for the no rally thing. I really thought the election was largely wrapped up before even the polling day. But then something happened. And I think that is something very interesting to follow through.
Not before nomination day, you mean?
No, I thought just before nomination or just after nomination, it was wrapped up, basically.
Okay.
But now, I think it's still wrapped up, but I think there will be some interesting changes, which I would like to talk about in terms of, I still think the WP now will be status quo as far as Aljunied and Hougang is concerned, partly because of a number of things which have happened. In terms of...
Okay, so you earlier on, you had written an article saying it's a clean sweep by the PAP.
No, actually, my article was, it was going to be a landslide, and then probably, if they're going to hold on, it's going to be Aljunied and Hougang. But of course,
so that's consistent.
That one part.
Is that consistent? I mean, there's no change to your prediction.
To me, it's no change.
Okay, all right. And why do you think so? You said something changed. Why do you think so?
I think it's during the campaign, the way the campaign went about, I think the sympathy for the WP as far as Hougang and Aljunied is concerned has increased. But the WP is going, partly because it's going to suffer very badly in East Coast, Sengkang, Marine Parade. For that reason, I think it's going to be back to home as far as the WP supporters are concerned. I think this morning you saw what Low Tai Kang did and all that. So I think they'll be able to hold on. And partly it's because the PAP gave up Aljunied. It has given up Aljunied in one way or another.
Why do you say that? Why do you say that?
I think
and why do you say sympathy for WP?
I think first thing they sent a suicide squad, still a suicide squad. If they wanted to really reclaim it back, which I thought they may have done, they would have sent someone stronger in some form or another. They didn't. I think sympathy, the WP have been working on that ground there since 1991. I think the way things have moved, the bullying, and so on and so forth, and I think partly also because the way one of the Sengkang candidates actually misfired. So I think as a result, people are going back to Hougang and Junior, mainly because I think the way Pritham has managed the whole thing. Pritham has come out as a very, very strong, respected politician in this country. And I think Lau Tia Kiang, despite his illness, what he's been doing on the ground is really salutable. It's amazing. Yeah. Amazing. Right. So I think...
okay, very quickly, just a minute. Tai Ho, I saw you nodding ahead.
No, I agree.
When he talked about Pritham.
No, I agree with the amazing leadership in the Workers' Party. I think a lot of people initially didn't know very much about Pritham. And I think this election allows them to see that actually he is a very competent leader after Lau Tia Kiang. You know?
What do you mean by competent?
Okay, not just competent. In fact, if you see him on the ground, he takes charge. He basically just tells Channel News Asia, lower your mic. You know, let's move on to the room. And it's just the body language and the tone. It's very even. It's very calm.
Very calm.
Yeah, it's very calm. And
I saw that. I saw that also very much. I think many of us saw that in the crisis press conference, the late night media conference he did.
The thing is, you could see that the rest of them basically retreat to let him come to the fore and let him lead. But it was actually the way he dealt with Ms. Khan's investigation that a lot of people on social media responded so positively to it, you know. And he has not. It's not a kind of like a you know, look at me kind of situation. You know, he takes care of the job. He doesn't really take care of himself. So people look at him, and there's a lot of respect for the new leader that is in WP. And I think it's quite clear also that Sylvia is letting him lead.
Yeah,
and you can see that.
Bilveer, you are going to say something.
Sorry, I agree totally what you said. But there's one more additional element. First thing, I'm actually very proud because he's my former student. That's one. But number two, I think being a politician at home and the way he has performed, I've been in Aljunied for 29 years. I just shifted to East Coast. I know the way his party have been playing. But there's one more thing which we often miss. You know, at home, the competitiveness and the pushing and shoving which take place in politics goes on. But when Pritham goes overseas, even the PAP guys don't talk about it. He always talk about, hey, listen, this is Team Singapore. I may be from the WP, Edwin Tong may be from the PAP, but this is Team Singapore operating out of Singapore. And that's very unique, that's very mature. And I think from that angle, the opposition, as far as Pritham is concerned, has arrived. And I think most people, the young people, salute him for that. While we have a time to quarrel and fight, but when it comes to Singapore's interest, we are one, and we were not going to divert from that. I think that has won him tremendous amount of support, sympathy, all those things you want to talk about. That's Pritham, and that's a fundamental difference between him and Low. I'm not saying Low is anything less nationalist, but the way Pritham articulates it.
Yeah.
The narrative.
So if I can just jump in, I mean, I think we've plunged very quickly into an evaluation almost of the different opposition parties, and I wouldn't disagree with Prof Bilveer and Tai Ho in so far that the WP has done quite well. They have a lot of things going for them that are admirable. The politics ending at the shore, you know, before we go overseas, I think that's great. We've seen other opposition leaders who are far happier to, you know, hang a little bit of dirty laundry out in the international scene as well. But when it comes to these elections, if I can just take a little step back, I had expected at the start, when we knew that this was going to be a COVID elections, the campaign was largely going to be online and broadcast. There's going to be more airtime on TV for everyone. And I'd been hoping to see a certain sophistication from at least some of the parties in terms of how they engage online. But I think doing sort of very anecdotal dip tests with my friends, it sounds like it was just the old style of politics transferred online. The type of tactic, strategy, the rhetoric, the way of engagement. With the one difference is that the audience, you know, you can reach a far greater audience, even with the large rallies that we used to see in the past, it's amplified online. And I think we've seen some of the tactics not resonate so well, especially with the younger generation of netizens, people who have grown up. Donald, you know, co-wrote a really good commentary alluding to some of the ugliness that may have a stain even after July 10th on the society. So I was a little bit disappointed. I think that So obviously some of the younger candidates have a more innate comfort zone when it comes to online engagement and the way they portray things. But a lot of the parties, and we're not just talking about the
Nick, would you say that any particular party did better than the others in this area, in this space?
I think to echo what Prof Bilveer was saying, you know, the way the WP sort of carried themselves, they avoided the very obvious pitfalls of engaging at the same level. They always said, let's rise a little bit above the fray. I stand by my people. You know, there's some great sound bites coming up from
there was also a lot of humanization. There were the regular evening shows, you know, the WP shows, which was very entertaining, actually, very relaxed. People were singing, and it was very authentically done. You know, I mean, it wasn't like it was choreographed, and they could actually sing.
No, exactly. So it was the style of the communication. So the other parties also did their evening shows, right? Everybody has their thing, and they are so scripted, right? I'm sitting behind the same standard party backdrop. Let me tell you about, you know, my childhood and my humble upbringing, which is a standard opening spiel, right? But different parties, WPA, it seems to stick out. They engage a little bit better.
Yeah, interesting point.
Was really good. Yeah.
Thanks, Donald. You were nodding your head a lot.
Yeah, so I'll just jump in on Nick's point about voter engagement, and I think we can all see that there were differences across parties in the ability to harness the new modes of engagement. But I think, again, like as Nick says, we should move to a higher level of abstraction and take a step back. And I'd like to start by saying this is a really consequential election. This election is really about what kind of society, what kind of governance we want to deal with a post-pandemic world. And I think, you know, unfortunately, you know, even though we need a far more cohesive, we need a lot more citizen solidarity and a lot more citizen sacrifice to adapt to a disrupted post-pandemic future, I'm afraid that the ruling party has run this campaign in a way that is somewhat polarizing, divisive, in a way that is likely to alienate, as Nick says, younger voters who are a lot more attuned to the global discourse on race, who are a lot more attuned to the back and forth of social media.
Are you referring to any specific incident?
The Ms. Khan case especially, but also the series of POFMA correction directions. I mean, things that are said on social media, you know, these things we know, right? The people who are used to operating on social media, that, you know, there are various shades of truth and various shades of untruths, right? And of course, what POFMA does is to put things in a very stark, very binary, framing, right? And I think young people are turned off by that. And of course, POFMA is only used in one direction, right? It's always used on opposition politicians. And I think that entrenches the sense of unfairness. The other aspect of unfairness, again, you know, talking at a higher level of abstraction, is the whole Ivan Lim Gate affair, right? I think what, you know, the almost glee, the almost pleasure that some people took in deriding and castigating Ivan suggests that, you know, Singaporeans are a bit tired of elite governance, and they perceive elite governance, which there's nothing wrong with elite governance. Our system of elite governance is what ensures technocratic, good government, rational decision making. But I think increasingly people view elite governance as elitist government. And hence the term that was used to describe Ivan, he behaved like a real elitist. That provoked so much anti-establishment and anti-PAP sentiment, which is unfortunate because I think we need more elite governance. We need more rational technocratic modes.
But not elitist.
But not elitist.
Yeah, and would you say part of it, I mean, what I observed, and I wrote a letter to the Straits Times Forum on this, you know, to say that, you know, it's like, you know, it's like, it's our turn now to hit you back.
Right.
You know, and there was a lot of glee, and it was very unfortunate. I mean, it was distasteful. There's a lot of glee that people had in taking shots at Ivan. You know, I mean, Ivan may not be the nicest guy on earth, but the point is, you know, when this happened, and then when you trace it back, you look at who fired the first shot and say, since you've been firing the first few shots, it's my turn to fire. And
but
since,
that's exactly the point. So we also see this tit for tat thing in the police reports, right? So police report was made against Ms. Khan, and then after that, suddenly a slew of police reports against everybody.
Heng Swee Keat as well.
Heng Swee Keat, Ong Ye Kang, and supporters of the PAP. So I mean, that's childish and petulant.
And that's very ugly and unhealthy. I think that's not good, regardless of what you think of the PAP.
And that's what you mean by consequential election, right? I mean that there are a lot of consequences, not just on the outcome, on the total votes. It's on how we conduct ourselves.
It's on a political culture. It's on a political culture. And I think the real unfortunate, sorry, Taiho, the real unfortunate consequence, I think, of the way this elections has been conducted is, I think, a more mean-spirited, a more divided, a culture that normalizes political bullying, that everybody and all is fair game, including private citizens. And I think that's really unhealthy. That's really unfortunate.
But is that exceptional? Is that different from the previous elections? I thought...
No. Which goes back to Bilveer's point that there's a lot more continuity than change. Because even though the population has changed, we have a younger population, which is what Donald is saying, that really does not accept or take to bullying or any kind of high-handed behavior. But you see a very deliberate, a very evident continuation. So I think there is this disenchantment with the younger population, which is what Donald's point.
So let's ask Jin Yao. You have you voted before?
Yeah, this is supposedly my second time, but I'm based in Los Angeles.
So you're obviously the youngest amongst us, even younger than Bilveer. So what are your thoughts about all the points that have been raised? I mean, clearly the impact on young people.
I mean, in terms of the conduct itself, the disappointment is palpable. I think my disappointment, and I speak not as an expert, but as a young observer informed by conversations with other young voters, right? The disappointment here is that we were hoping for a more substantive discussion. And I think the important context here is that we're not post-COVID yet. We're still very much in the middle of a pandemic. And even in that context as well, in the last 5 years, at least from a social welfare perspective, I don't think there's been a period of 5 years when we've had rich discussions about inequality, about poverty, about homelessness, about the importance of the living wage. So coming into it, the expectation was that in the 9-day period, this would be the substantive issues that we'll focus on, right? So, and to be fair, some of the parties, I think, do have substantive manifestos. The BUP, I think the SDP policies, they have been examined. Fellow voters have looked at it and examined it in detail. But I think what we're recognizing is kind of two things. Number one, there's a very clear communication divide. So the example I always come to, we talked about Ms. Khan, was that when the news first broke on Twitter, she was the #1 trending topic. So the I Stand with Raisa hashtag was #1. But I don't think, and correct me if I'm wrong, it ever appeared on mainstream media. That the fact that she was trending, that the hashtag was trending on social media.
Not so strongly. There were hints. There were hints. Yeah.
Right. So, and then the second one is also a recognition that the G itself is not where discussions can happen. And yes, there's some resignation, but I think there's also a recognition that a lot of the discourse has to happen between the Gs itself. So, when we are discussing between the progressive wage model and the minimum wage, right, we can't discuss the nuances of it in this election. Now, even the ruling party has said it wants to extend PWM, but what does it actually mean beyond the three sectors it's currently applied to? And what does the minimum wage mean? So how do we assess what's a reasonable minimum wage? Just can't do that within the 9 days. And hopefully, my little sense of optimism is that it's not all recognition that the political culture is completely toxic. There's this recognition that work happens after July 10th as well, and not just during these 9 days.
So I want to pick up on that, and also what Donald said earlier about consequential election. It's a very interesting term, right? Now, I think there are a lot of things that we can pick up and follow through from this election. There are a lot of new ideas that have surfaced. And usually what happens is after the election, all the conversations end, is business as usual. But I feel that's very important for us to pick up on some of the issues that sort of emerged. And then, people like us, all of us, or the media, the mainstream media, social media, should all play a part in ensuring continuity or continuation of those discussions and dialogue, so that you deepen understanding and knowledge.
We as a people, I think we get the elections that we deserve. So the reason why it doesn't carry on, I know it's a stereotype to say that Singaporeans are always obsessed with bread and butter issues, but it tends to devolve into that way. And I think that if the public discourse, the civil society, our discussions, continue with young people throughout the intervening 4 or 5 years between elections, that'll be great. But they tends to be very, very pocketed, and people maybe we need more chat shows like this, right?
That's how it used to be. But there's no reason why we should not change it. I mean, for example,
it's supply and demand, right? So when people demand it, we will see some.
No, but sometimes the demand is latent.
But sometimes the demand is latent. What do you want to see continue?
No, you see, for example, topics like patriotism has come up. What exactly is patriotism? I mean, Alfian Saad brought up that in one of my interviews with him, and those were interesting. And then Danny Kwa, the dean of Lee Kuan Yew School, he brought up the point that income inequality is not important. He said social mobility is more important. Now that's a fundamental difference in the way people look at things. So what I'm trying to say is that these are very, very important issues. Now there wasn't enough time for us to go into depth, but I think some groups have to take responsibility and say, let's start opening up the discussion about these things. No, otherwise everything goes back to normal, bread and butter issues, and then you wait for the next election, and then we don't grow, we don't evolve.
Yeah, Jin Yao's point is correct. I have friends in the US say, hey, how are you dealing with these snap elections? I'm like, what snap elections? This is normal for us. Okay, US, they prepare 2 years for their elections. But it's 100% correct, because beyond the discussions about broad sort of thematic issues like patriotism and all that, when we look at POFMA, when we look at the police reports, it degenerates the conversation a little bit. There has been an issue with online falsehoods during this election, right? Most recently, there's a video from Kazakhstan being circulated as proof that, the self-inking pens we get in the election booth, your vote will disappear. These are kind of rubbish. Thankfully, they didn't gain much traction, but everybody had to come out to debunk. But we don't talk about that. We talk about POFMA being levied on individuals and stuff like that. So the issues are obscured. And I guess a key question is, how do we then ensure that we keep this conversation going? This notion of the bullying tactics and the very sort of low-down tactics. I mean, I saw opposition guys circulating photos on Facebook with the PAP candidates poster with their shoes and slippers on top of it. I mean, that's disgusting. And I'm sure young people and hopefully rational, not so young people will also react against this kind of very gutter type politics.
But gutter politics doesn't just happen. It's often a reaction to something, and I think it's a lot of pent-up feelings, that's being reacted to. I mean, it's coming out at this point in time. If I could go back to Jin Yao, you are involved in social media, right? I mean, you've got a site, what kind of issues do you all talk about in your site?
So it depends. So the questions I ask, this is how I'll frame it. So the questions that people are asking are actually more national than municipal, right? So, and if they are undergrads, then they're more concerned about job opportunities and employment. So we've heard talk about broad themes about jobs and employment, but now the question is what the specifics are. So what kinds of jobs and what types of jobs do we want? That's one. And I think the other bigger point, a more meta point, is about diversity. So we talked about, representation, about wanting to see your ideals and your policies and principles represented in Parliament, which is where laws are made in that sense. But there's also, I think, a third point, which maybe speaks to what you're saying, which is that goes beyond issues itself, which is understanding that the process of making change does not just depend on the government itself. So I think it's been there's this, I think we're far too accustomed to being like passive participants. So the government sets the terms of the agenda, right? We have to adhere to our Singapore conversation, we participate in it. But there is now a bit of greater recognition that we actually push the issue based on a ground up kind of movement. And you see
do you think young people like you would be prompted to take charge a lot more and say, let's do something.
Yeah.
Because it's going to be your world.
Yeah, so I've done the episodes on the website, right? So they volunteer with the political parties. They send emails and messages to candidates and constituencies. They run their own websites to increase awareness. They comb through the manifesto. Now, you might say, hey, that's selection bias because I'm only speaking to those who are already informed. But then these voters are generating content. They're aggregating information. And more importantly, they're also talking to their family and friends. So through our interviews, they're talking about having hard conversations with their parents, right? You might say, oh, that's a very small step, but I think that's how change slowly gets accumulated, where you actually broach these difficult topics and, hey, why are you voting in a particular direction? And why is it that your habits have been...
Are young people disappointed?
I think they will be, I think there will be a sense of disappointment on July 10th in the evening when the results don't pan out the way it's expected. Right.
But let me ask you, Jin Yao, is there a bifurcation? Is there a separate? I mean, we talk about young people as if you're a homogeneous group. I think it's quite different. I mean, there are different young people I talk to. There are a lot of young people I talk to who want status quo, who don't want things to change, who are extremely loyal to the ruling party and so on. So, I'm not sure what we mean by how do young people feel in general.
Yeah,
Is
that's
it possible
true.
to generalize?
And if there's someone like that, I think that's great. I don't think the idea of participation is homogeneity, where everyone thinks the same way. I want a space where the different individuals with different points of views, with different principles can come in. Now, of course, on certain issues, this both sides now thing might be problematic, right? Because certain things I think are inalienable. But on most issues, I think there's this opportunity to open up space like this. Yeah.
If I may come in,
I think I had a conversation with one of the leaders of the opposition parties.
How to continuing with the conversation.
Sorry. Yes. So, Bilveer, please.
Sorry. I thought, Vishwa, you had a fantastic point there. How to continue with our general elections, critical issues after July 10, I think is going to be one of the most significant takeaways. If we depend everything from top down, I think we're going to lose a lot of things. I think the consensus I'm getting is that we actually need to take charge. And I think since 2011, at least where I am here, in the university, we see something. We do not depend on the people outside, but the students are actually very, very active. Unfortunately, there are rules about how you do engagement of race issue, Chinese privilege, income inequality, things which are so taboo outside. But yet this goes on as long as they are well managed. Actually, I'm the advisor of the Political Science Society of the US. And I see this going on, but how to actually make it broader, wider, I think it's going to be one of the challenges. So you just cannot rely on political science students. We need to go beyond. And if we continue, then I think the point about consequential elections is going to take home and take roots. And therefore, we have taking something very fundamental for us for the next GE and probably after, because at the end of the day, I really believe, and I mean, look, every day I deal with youngsters. I think at the end of the day, how these guys are going to see the world outside, which is so challenging today. I mean, I got kids who are so worried. They got the results, and I tell you, I've never seen a lightning strike them as it struck them
this year. Yeah.
It's here.
And then you have junior colleges issuing warning against their students to not post on social media about politics.
Yeah. So
no points here, right?
Yeah. Let me pick up from that. My own experience organizing IQ 2015 now is actually if you do it well and you know how to traverse, you can actually move very close to the boundaries, so to speak, the OB markers. You can, and actually it has got a powerful signaling effect to young people to say, hey, we can talk about this. On IQ, we have talked about race. We have talked about race, religion. We have talked about, it's how we talk about it. And the Miss Khan incident actually demonstrates that. There's a lot of appetite for it. People are talking about it. But we need to be able to demonstrate that you can talk about it, but in a particular way. Yes.
Yeah, but this one, the point I wanted to make just now was that, I spoke to the leader of one of the opposition parties. And I said, hey, look, with the more digital environment now, younger people more activated, it's great for you guys, right? Yeah. And he said something that you sort of raised, which is that actually young people these days are the worst. They have been born into this, sort of the PAP world, with the incumbents for the longest time, this type of government. And they've grown up with all the creature comforts, all bread and butter issues, all taken care of. So the notion of potential change, right, of whatever shape, form it is not exactly something that they are very desirable of. And this is an opposition guy being pessimistic about how young people are today. So I don't really. No,
but I would disagree. But sorry, Tai Ho, you're going to say something.
Yeah, I would also disagree. I think that I want to go back to Nicholas' point that to an outsider, this is a snap election. How many people have 9 days of campaigning? You have Taiwan, that's half a year. And America, which is almost the full year. So if you want to be fair and you want to change the fundamental structure so that young people can breathe a little more, or even older people can breathe a little more, is to change the rules of the game. Because you need to. Because in all of 9 days, I mean, before we know it, it's cooling day. Tomorrow is cooling off day. So you need to change that so that it is fairer to the opposition. I live in Jalan Besar. You talk about party machinery. I walk around, I only see PAP posters. I don't see any PV posters at all because PV is too small.
Yeah.
You know? So I really don't see any posters and all. So if you want to talk about even
fundamental.
Yeah.
I mean, you're talking about go to the fundamental.
If you want
and I agree with you.
You need to change certain things.
And also over the years, the issues have become also over the years, Tai Ho, I think the issues have become more complex.
Correct.
You know, and more varied.
It's just not enough.
Yes. Donald, yes.
Yeah, to pick on Tai Ho's point, right? Considering, I mean, we were talking about how ugly and divisive and polarizing these elections has gotten. I think most people will say, well, I actually feel that the sooner we get over these elections, the better, because there'll be more people hurt at the rate we're going. But the more fundamental point I agree with, which is that a longer period of campaigning would force people to think, would have more time to think about the issues, to raise the nuances and complexities, and to allow people to develop the language, the tools, the frames, to talk about policy in more sensible and more enlightened tones, right? And that's really what we need, because, oftentimes the reaction is, oh, elections are not the time to talk about these difficult policy trade-offs. And so then the reaction from people like Viswa is, therefore, we need to carry this on post-elections. But then what happens post-elections is that you've got a dominant PAP that sets the agenda, that frames the issues the way it wants to frame those issues, so that these conversations are all either allowed or sanctioned by the state, and the boundaries are carefully monitored by the PAP state. And I have doubts. I mean, I don't want to be too cynical about or skeptical about the value of these conversations, but I have doubts about how authentic and genuine and how far they can go.
Well, my view, I take your point, Donald, but my view very quickly is I think it is possible. I've been there and done it. I think it's possible. We can. And I do feel that the government is going to be a lot more willing to allow for the boundaries to be pushed outside of election. But I agree with you that some of the fundamental issues, like the duration of the hustings, has to change, has to be. Now, and because there's one more thing, when you have 9 days of elections, things become sharp. Conversations are sharper, right? But when you stretch it out to a much longer period, it's more nuanced. You have a lot more chance for nuance.
Vishwa, when you say sharp, do you mean, elbow short of sharp?
No, sharp as in adversarial sharp. Sharp tongue.
We focus on the wrong things, right?
Yeah. And becomes, tit for tat, because I have exactly a few hours to hit you back.
Elbows,
so it's sharp, But if I could go back to Bilveer, you have seen the most number of elections, maybe together with Tai Ho and me as well, because we saw it when we were in SBC those days coverage. But you've been an analyst, right? What are some of the other fundamental things that you think we ought to change? The markers. I mean, what Tai Ho talked about the period of campaigning 9 days.
I think the mother of all fundamentals is, honestly, it's very sensitive. I think the election department should be out of the Prime Minister's office. I think that's the most fundamental, because that sets everything down. You talk of boundaries, you talk of the number of days, everything. I know it's a no-no from many perspectives, but I think that's the mother of all. Then the rest of it, I think, will follow through. And I think number two, you need to change with society. I think 9 days is too short. And the younger generation, I think, will definitely need much more to mull through. The reason being simple. My father couldn't care less go 5 days or 9 days, because they were so clear about where we are. We are doing in a wonderful place. Let's get on and get over with and move on.
Life was simpler. You know what I'm saying?
Much simpler. The issues were, as you said, much more simpler. Today, they are so complex. And every one of us, they are intergenerational issues, and you want to resolve them in 9 days, it's not possible. And then number two, we have got online and offline today. And both are equally important. And how do you settle that in 9 days? It's not going to happen. I think number three, I agree with Tai Ho. The disparity among the political parties is amazing. We have one Premier League party, the PAP, and then we got Division 1 party, one or two parties, and the rest of them all in Division 3. How do you compare and contrast them?
I know we have a TV program where there are three
very different.
You have TV program where?
We have a TV program, constituency party broadcast, 3 empty seats. I mean, which country allows for that?
Yeah.
Well, apparently they didn't know it was that time. So
no, but talking about that TV broadcast, the other thing that probably should change, and it struck me when I was watching the debate, right? That Vivian Balakrishnan took part in. The disparity in duration. When you're given 1.5 minutes to make a point, and the PAP representative has 4.5 minutes, it makes a huge difference because you can't develop an argument in 1.5 minutes. Seriously.
So I think the assumption was that the oppositions would all be going
but come on, I mean, seriously, the opposition they're different parties, So what I'm
but
saying
none of
is,
them went after each other. And to be fair, I've never seen so many people use the word meta since that English debate when James decided to introduce that into the public lexicon. But interesting point was the Mandarin debate, right? When WE didn't send someone for that one as well. So that was notable. And I think TV is not. I know over the course of years you guys would be able to advise better, but we've had TV debates, and then we had years without TV debates, and then now we're still going back to it. I'm just wondering whether that is one of the skill sets that the politicians will eventually need to develop, not just online, but maybe really speaking on broadcast, and not just at rallies and stuff like that. But I just wanted to add point number 4 to what Bilveer was saying about what needs to change. I hope that at some stage we can have a conversation about what type of political leadership are we talking about. Donald mentioned a more elite, technocratic, excellent leaders in terms of crafting policy and execution. But I think we saw with Ivan Lim issue and with some of these other things where we've talked about happiness with regards to some of the gutter, dirty tactics and stuff like that, sense of graciousness, right? Sense of likability, sense of character, values and things like that. We don't tend not to have too much of a conversation. It's definitely not something like Tai Ho said. It's not something we can do in 9 days. But I hope that we carry on this conversation in the longer term to add on to what Jin Yao was saying about things we should talk about.
If I can pick up from what you say, and I'd like to put this question to Jin Yao. You are the youngest amongst us. Idealism is still there, strong, not jaded.
I'm still idealistic.
Who say we are jaded?
All right. So let me ask you this, right? When I said at one point, when I said in my letter to the Straits Times that it is possible to take the dirty out of politics. I said it is possible to take the dirty out of politics. A lot of my friends of similar vintage told me you must be mad. Politics is by definition dirty. You can't. Now I don't believe in it. Honestly, I think it is possible to take it out. What do you think? Young people, you all believe that it can be, does politics have to be dirty?
I will kind of respond to it by alluding to this kind of like tension but this slight disagreement that you and Prof Donald had, which is continuity and changing the structure, right? Someone wiser than me used to say to me, which is it's possible to campaign for reform within the structure and work within the structure, but also work within the structure for the future as well. So like you can do two things at once. You can change the system, but also work within the system to make it better. So those are not mutually exclusive. And the way to answer your question, I think here there is a recognition that there are certain type of, and which is what Nicholas mentioned, there's a certain personality of candidates that people are drawn to. And it's not just based on how you articulate your narrative and background, right? There were candidates who spoke to their low-income backgrounds, and it used to be a immediate sell, right? Because it speaks that you can relate to their background, but there's a growing recognition that it's not just the amount of privilege that you have, but how you use it. And so in a way, I think in this sense, more particularly the few WP candidates who have used Twitter very well and presented themselves in very human ways, I think were the most effective in it. And I think it's not just limited to the WP slate where they were able to show, for instance, snippets in their lives, right? Where they came from, how they are. So there is a particular type. I'm not sure what that type looks like, but it looks something like that.
I think the key here is authenticity. Authenticity. Some of them, when they went out to say, I came from a poor family and this, and it didn't come across authentic. On the other hand, there were others said it with so much of authenticity, and people are drawn to that. And what Nick said, likability, those things actually do matter. And they go against this notion of dirty politics. Yes, Tai Ho, sorry.
Can I just answer it in a different way?
Yeah.
Whether politics is dirty, I think it will always be dirty. It's just how dirty. But I just want to turn it around to say, the PAP kept saying, we need a solid mandate. You know? Yeah, the thing is, for me, they've never been without that mandate. They've always had that mandate, you know. So
depends on whose perspective.
60% is not enough, you know. Then they want 70%. The thing is that has to change. If that doesn't change, then I think a lot of things in Singapore won't change. Because if the PAP accepts the fact that 60% is damn good, 55% is also good, then I think things will be different. We will all breathe, because the fundamental things, like for instance what Bilveer said, you know, the election office may need to change, you know, so that the premise of an election is changed, where we don't get 9 days. We maybe will get 19 days or 29 days or 39 days, you know. And I think...
And actually all of those things that we're talking about, right, where there's a semblance of independence in the election office, right? And then you have you have a lot more than 9 days. And then you have this notion that you don't need to have such a high percentage.
Yeah, so
when all of this comes together...
PAP needs to fundamentally evolve into...
But when you bring... but all that will happen only if you do not feel that you need 100% of to be strong, right? Correct. But it also requires a willingness to share.
Yes.
A willingness to share. Because actually the way I see it, if you share, you actually can stay in power longer.
Yeah, just to pick up that point,
yes.
It's not just willingness to share with with non-PAP. It's even willingness to share within the PAP. I mean, when the PAP first introduced its new slate of candidates, I thought they were incredibly likable. Yes. Right, Ivan Lim aside, right? I thought all of them had interesting stories, and I wish they could be featured more. But somewhere from the point they were introduced and now, somebody in the party, I assume it's a deliberate decision, just decided that we can't let the 4G run this. We don't want to feature our new candidates. We don't want to tell their stories. And they went back to the centralized top-down modes of electioneering. And hence you see all these hardball tactics, right? And it's incredibly unfortunate because, you know, the PAP is a party that has incredible talent, depth and width of talent, a fair diversity of candidates. And they should really trust their own people and their own candidates a lot more, rather than to revert so instinctively and in such an insecure way to things that, you know, that they've always been doing. And I think to a large extent that resort to 2G and 3G methods of command and control has made the election the way it has been.
Yeah.
So can I just point out, before we get too down this on ourselves, right? I think when we talk about dirty politics, I have friends in a lot of other countries who look at our politics and said, you know, in terms of gutter or dirty politics, you guys are kindergarten level. Okay, you know, some guys get run out of town for not being nice.
But Nick,
you know?
So
I mean, I think we should
no. I mean, there are many countries in the world that really don't. Let's not compare ourselves with really those dirty countries. Okay, we don't, and we have always prided ourselves in exceptionalism. So why can't we be exceptional here? Right. True, okay. Maybe this is a good time for us to. Sorry, Bilveer, you had something to say very quickly.
Two small points. 9 days electioneering is crisis electioneering, definitely. So you extend it, I think things will change. But number two, in our talk so far, we are talking across each other. We are missing out something very fundamental. We are talking about gladiator politics between the PAP and the opposition. I think if you miss out the electorate, I think you miss out something very fundamental. Something fundamental is changing at the bottom of the pyramid there. And if you think it is not, then something is wrong. If both sides, the opposition and the PAP, realizes that the ground will not buy the products which we are selling, they are the most important political consumers. So how the consumers have changed, I think is very important. If the PAP don't want to change, if the opposition don't want to change, but if the political consumers want to change, I can tell you, Vishwa, this will be a totally different world.
And that's a very, it's a great point. Jin Yao, I see you nodding. Very quickly,
that's a great point, and I would just say and extend Prof Bilveer's point to say that form of engagement cannot just happen during the election itself. I think there's a demand for this to happen regularly, and that's something that's not mandated or framed singularly by the state itself. You know, we've seen past engagement attempts like the OSC, which is well-intentioned, but because it's designed in a particular way, it's not elicited the kind of engagement that's seen. And The other quick point would be that the types of people we engage. So I imagine like individuals who are in the forum who listen to this are very well informed, right? Then the challenge now is to how do you broaden the participation from a youth perspective? How do you reach the marginalized and disadvantaged? That's a huge challenge that I think has been overlooked for too long, and that needs to be fixed also.
Yeah, just also on Bilveer's point about, I assume when he said the bottom of the pyramid, he doesn't mean it in the income sense, but
no, the
young people, right?
Yeah.
So
the broader
base.
I
think what's so interesting, and why I say this is a consequential election. I think this is probably the first election where we will see a real generational divide in the way voters respond to the ruling party.
That's true.
Probably the first time we've seen the language and the discourse of Zoomers versus or Boomers versus Zoomers and Millennials. First time that frame of reference is relevant. I think for older voters, and by older voters I mean anybody who is my age and above, right, 40s and above. For them, this is very much back to 2001. I mean, we remember 2001 when there was a flight for safety, aversion to reliability and predictability. I think for voters in that age group, 45 and above, there will be that flight to safety and predictability. And as Jin Yao was saying, and because boomers as well as Generation Xers, they constitute the bulk of the voters, they will give the PAP a resounding majority. And that would, my fear, because of the way the PAP has run this election, my fear is that Zoomers and Millennials will feel even more disengaged, even more disappointed, and even disgusted after July 10th. And that does not herald well for the future of Singaporean
society.
Because it means more bitterness, more sense that, yes, the party won, but the ruling party won, but what were the means?
But do you think the bitterness, if you define it as that, would result in retaliation or resignation?
No, I think it's not in the ethos of Singaporeans to retaliate, and certainly young people. So I think what we will get is a sort of passive aggression, the sort that you saw in the US after Trump was elected, although he didn't win. He didn't win a popular.
But it is a form.
And what was the reaction? What was the reaction? Not my president.
Correct.
And if young people feel that this is not the government that I see as legitimate, that's terrible, right? Because then they've given up on Singapore. Then they've given up on any chances of reform within the system. And then what I fear longer term is the radicalization, not in religious or whatever terms, but a sense of disconnect with the political system, a sense of disconnect with governance in Singapore.
Right. All right, so I agree with that. Now let's now segue into the second question. We have about 10 minutes left. So predictions.
Taking bets now, right? Taking bets.
Yeah, taking bets. Yeah. So I can see you, Nick. Yeah. Okay. So who wants to go first? Yes, Tai Ho.
Yeah. I find it very sad that the opposition has not taken advantage of the single wards. For instance, I give an example. Dr. Tan Cheng Bock. Now, he is probably now the most popular person walking the election, but he probably will not be returned because he's got 2 ministers in his ward. So my thinking is, I just don't understand why the opposition didn't take more advantage of the single wards, and they want to fight the PAP in the GRs. That's why.
That's an interesting point. So it's about strategy, right?
Yeah.
Election strategy.
So I say that the place to watch is really the single ward between Chee Soon Juan and Murali, in my view.
Really?
Because I think that Chee Soon Juan has brought this to the people. He says, I will be a full-time MP versus you are getting a part-time MP. So over there's a huge debate whether MPs should be full-time or part-time, and he's brought up a lot more examples of how Murali has not been taking care of the constituency. So for me, it's a very interesting place to look because it's a single wards. And
so you would focus on the single wards having better chance?
No. I still think that Aljunied will hold.
Will hold with Hougang?
With WP, yeah. But I think the person to watch on polling night is how much Heng Swee Keat will win in terms of percentage. Versus the very, very popular Nicosia. You know?
Actually, somebody told me recently that when you talk about strong mandate, and he is the Prime Minister designate.
Correct.
The strong mandate is not a national mandate. The strong mandate is East Coast.
Yes. So
actually,
that's
how interesting
people
is
look
the
at
fact that
what's the percentage that he will win.
Yeah.
PM
Yes,
Lee has come out and say he may stay on for longer than the initial planned transition
until COVID is settled.
Yeah, so you know that's an interesting signal as to again speaking to Donald's point that this is one of the old relying on the more popular leader to push the party and to push the result as well. My gut feel, when you're talking about results, I think potentially somewhere in between 2011 and 2015, something in and around the 65%. But interestingly, when I talk to my friends, some of them, like Bilveer at the start said, clean sweep, whitewash. Some people saying 73, some people saying 75%. But they come from a slightly older generation. My only question, again, to Donald's point, is Zoomer versus Boomer. When the proportions start to shift and we start to see the voices that we hear online becoming more representative of the majority, within the middle, I think that's when we'll start to get a better sense of whether the online rhetoric actually translates to voting behavior. I still see a lot of uncle, aunties giving the response that, everything's going fine. Why should we rock the boat? Everything has been good for me. I don't understand opposition parachute in and tell me a few things that I have problems. I got no problems, and that's really the feedback that we hear from the elder demographic. But yeah, when the proportions start to shift, I think that's when we'll see changes.
I'm more concerned about what the substantive or qualitative element of those results. So it might be 65%, and it may feel like status quo. Workers' Party hangs on to barely by the skin of their teeth. Aljunied and Hougang. But 65% might also mean one where PAP wins everything except for Hougang.
Right.
It wins everything. It might still be a landslide. And I think in many ways that would be the worst of all possible worlds.
Correct.
Because you've got a very unrepresentative, very undiverse parliament. Singaporeans will feel very disgruntled. I think the majority of Singaporeans, even if they vote PAP, they want some opposition representation in parliament. So 65% might mean quite different things depending on how the results actually come out.
But is there any GRC other than Aljunied that you think may have a chance of going to the opposition ward?
I don't think has a strong chance, but I think the one that comes after Aljunied would be West Coast, right? But again, like Tai Ho, I feel that if Dr. Tan had been fielded in a single seat, it will almost be a slam dunk. But so this is one where you go for high probability of a small win, or do you shoot for a low probability of a big win? And I think
that's a good point.
Go for a low probability of a big win, and they might be disappointed. But I do think that after Aljunied, West Coast would probably be the next closest GRC.
Jin Yao?
Yeah, I'm not going to disagree with all the assessments. I'm not an expert, so I'm going to be naive. I'm going to make a post-GE prediction. I'm going to disagree slightly with Prof Donald. I'm going to say that it wouldn't be resignation, or it wouldn't be radicalization or resignation. I think there'll be a period where we'll be really disappointed with the result. But I think two things. Number one, I think the parties are realizing that the online and social media space is something that they have not capitalized on before this election. Had it not been for the pandemic, maybe one silver lining is that many of the online rallies and all the online webinars have been great. As in, this is a very direct way to connect with not just young voters, but anyone. And previously, had it not been for something like this wouldn't be something that they could work on. And hopefully this is something that continues. I think the second thing is, and that's from my perspective, and I'm hoping it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, where we want things to change. I don't just mean politically, but in terms of the way we engage. And so maybe from the starting point of wanting things to change and being the change you want to see kind of thing, that we will actually have a more diverse, not just politically again, but like a more diverse representation during the next election. Yeah. So that's my cop-out answer.
Right. We'll have to start wrapping up now. So I'm going to go, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to go to Bilveer and ask you whether you have anything to add on this point. And then I'm going to ask you to make one wish that you'd like to see changed in the PAP and one for the opposition. What you'd like to see change for each one of you, I'd like you to say, as a parting shot, what you'd like to see change, that one most important thing change with the PAP and one most important thing to change with the opposition. Yes.
Okay, first thing first, I think the results to me will be very largely impinged on the way the campaign was conducted. And I think the online was very important. But the PAP had been conducting a ground campaign for the last 5 years. And I think they've been playing the advantage of incumbent. The only place incumbency for the WP has been the 2 wards which they have. So that's why I see the results as status quo, and the online, while a lot of noise, I still think you're not going to see this translated into votes. That's one point. About Chee Soon Juan, I agree. But in the by-election, he did the same thing. I'll be a full-time MP. It did not work the last time. Will it work this time? Let's see. In terms of change in the workers, in the opposition, I wish they will get together more often and set up some kind of a coalition among themselves. As long as they are one by one, they'll be cut to pieces. But there's no chance. There's no chance and there's no future for them. Sorry for being so brutal. They need to get together. As far as the PAP is concerned, it has done a good job, but I do not like their bullying tactics and playing on fear. I think after 61 years, they can be much more moralistic on the higher ground and treat us and respect us with greater respect.
And is the word that comes to your mind magnanimity?
Definitely, definitely.
Right.
Otherwise, what LKY said that one day will come. Simple as that.
Right. Yes, who wants to go next?
Okay,
okay, Tai Ho. Yes.
Okay. My wish would be for the PAP to relook at this concept of mandate, that it doesn't need to be 65, 70, it could be 50. So basically they need to evolve to be a more mature party to allow for good opposition. And for the opposition, I would echo Bilveer, they need to get together, because right now they are just, especially now that they are in the social media, there's a lot of noise and people get lost and drowned in social media. They don't get to hear, So right now their disadvantage is that they are just too noisy and too crowded. So that's my wish.
Thank you. Nick?
I have to go a bit meta since everybody is going meta these days. Obviously, I don't think I would say opposition or PAP. I would say politicians and society. I think I would like for both sides to realize that, we are all people on both sides of the divide, right? Politicians are humans and voters are humans as well. And society evolves, communities evolve. And I hope that we can see a little bit of what we talked about earlier, the elevation of political discourse to include, magnanimity, decency, graciousness, and building this kind of conversation. It shouldn't be, 9 days of electioneering, then after that we talk about unity and coming together. I think politics can unite if it's executed in the right way. Political discourse can unite by understanding different sides better and, instead of sniping and things like that. Yeah. So my hope is, for politics to evolve in that particular direction. And I think all of us on all sides, whichever role we play, have a role to play in that.
And it's predicated on the ability to listen and the desire to listen.
If I had to say, okay, so instead of circular, I think our leaders should lead the way by setting the right example as well. So maybe that's a starting point.
Great point. Yes, Donald.
Yeah, so I echo what everybody says around diversity, humility, and magnanimity. But one thing that we also need to think about is rules and norms, right? Norms probably more important than rules, because you can have rules, but people don't adhere to them. But we need a better set of norms about how politicians should be. Just because you can do something, just because it's legal to do something, like make police reports, doesn't mean we should use them as a political tool. We need better guardrails and restraints that all parties adhere to, whether in the offline world or especially in the online world. We have not been that digitalized for a long time yet. I mean, it's irrelevant. So I understand that these rules will take time to evolve. But I think what this election has made clear is we need better informal rules. We need better norms to guide parties' behaviors, the behavior of fervent supporters on both sides. And because at the rate we are going, we're going to come unhinged. We're going to become unrestrained in the online world, as well as possibly in the offline world. And that's dangerous.
Thank you. Right? The young man gets the final word.
I guess for the ruling party, it would be to not see opposition, and I mean that generally as like, not see disagreements as opposition. Before the pandemic and before the election itself, advocates, activists, academics, researchers have been pointing to many of the gaps and inequalities. And by pointing something out that disagrees with existing policies is not opposition to current, it's not opposition to the state itself, and maybe even progressively divorcing, equating the state with the country itself, or with the government with the country itself. That would be one. I think for the opposition, one thing that I think has stood out this time around negatively is the anti-immigration sentiments that sometimes border on xenophobia. I think we've had enough of it. I think we've had enough of it through the white paper protests and all these things, and I think it's time to move on from it. So yeah.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. So I'd like to end by saying this. You know, I really like the term that Donald used, that this is a consequential election. I really like that because it's really about the consequence of our actions, our deeds. Nick, you talked about being exemplary, you know, because people are watching. People are watching what you're doing, how you're doing it, what you're saying, everything, you know. So I'd like to see actually that, you know, I'd like to see a day when people look at the election, general election, as an opportunity for nation building. This is an opportunity, just like National Day. It is an opportunity for us to bring people together. It is possible, you know, and I hope that we will stop looking at each other, because we're all fellow Singaporeans at the end of the day. You know, we shouldn't look towards each other as people we want to annihilate. And the consequence of that is terrible for the rest of society, you know. I'd like to thank you very much for making time to join us. I hope you found this as useful as I did.
Thank you.
Have a good day, gentlemen.
Thank you so much,
tomorrow,
guys.
remember, tomorrow is cooling off, so just cool off. Thank you.
Thank you.